Welcome to Crossover the Pond, brought to you by 21 Media Productions and Sports Social. He's Drew Lasker, I'm Josh Sexton, and this is episode 14 as we continue our NBA journey, a short hezzy tween and stutter step away here in the UK. Drew, how have you been, man? This is a little bit later for us to be recording in a week. I've seen you've done a couple of Amazon gigs since we last spoke as well. How's it been? Have you been enjoying the hoops?
Yeah, it's good, man. It's I say this every week, but it just moves so fast, man. It's like spinning plates to be able to keep up with it nationally. Obviously, there's a lot of content creators, analysts who just focuses strictly on teams, and boy, that's easier when you just able to hone in and zero in on one team. But when you're trying to cover all 30, your eyes are kind of everywhere every night, but it's fun, man. It's so much fun, and we're almost at the All-Star break, so looking forward to that. Looking forward to LA hosting the league in the Intuit Dome. So yeah, man, exciting times ahead.
Absolutely, yeah, and I can tell you first-hand experience that arena is definitely ready to
Oh
host
man, yeah.
Hallmark events, so I'm excited to see how LA shows out for All-Star Weekend. But you mentioned how hard it is to keep up with all 30 teams, and I've been having the same problem, really. Like, this is the period of the season where we're kind of almost limping over the line to All-Star break, really. Like, there's injuries left, right, and centre. Last time we spoke sort of at length, I think we talked about injuries to Jokic and Wemby and all these kind of things I guess we were concerned about heading up to the All-Star game. Well, we're getting to that point now, and it really does feel like teams are limping over the line. So I wanted to focus this week on a couple of teams who we were maybe a little bit critical of earlier in the season for different reasons, and we'll get into some of those reasons as we go through each team, but ones who've turned the tide, really, if not just in the past week, then over a slightly longer period of time. And I want to start with the Cleveland Cavaliers, Drew, because I think a couple of times this season, while we gave them the benefit of the doubt and the caveat that health was always an issue for the Cavs and they hadn't been able to get that main five on the floor, this is a really interesting case, to be honest, because they got to a point where they were healthy, they got that five on the floor, they were winning some basketball games, but things still didn't quite look right. And then Darius Garland gets another injury of, an injury plagued, or at least, lack of fitness and sharpness plagued season for Darius Garland. So prayers up to him. I do hope he is back soon because he's a player that I really like. But it's very interesting because he goes down and the Cavs just insert Dean Wade into the lineup and really turn a corner. And I don't know about you, Drew, like watching Donovan Mitchell and how, virtuoso he's been this season. And we all know he can do this. He was capable of doing this in Utah as well, where it feels like any given night he can just give you 40 because he's that level of scorer. But because he is that level of scorer and because the ball handling duties and all those things rely on him, actually, rather than having a secondary ball handler next to them in the backcourt, I'm kind of wondering now if the main thing the Cavs need is just almost defensive support next to him, and that's the thing that will help them be a good and competitive basketball team.
Yeah, it's a great point. Donovan Mitchell this year has been unbelievable. I mean, he is a dynamic offensive force, and we know about his scoring ability, his first step, his creation off the dribble. He's a third level scorer. And but the areas that he's really grown at this year is his playmaking ability and his leadership. And that goes to your point about, do you actually need another uh, player beside him who actually needs the ball in their hands? Because the knock on Donovan was that he does need to be more creative for the other guys because he's so great at creating his own. But he has taken that step so far this season, and I mean, this year he's having a career year scoring the ball. I mean, a career year shooting the ball, scoring the ball, threes made. He's just playing at another level. I mean, he had 45 last night, and over the last three games, he's averaging 38 points. He scored over 30 25 times now this year. So I'm never really concerned about him. It's the others. And it's just about making sure you're able to spoon feed Evan. Make sure you're able to spoon feed Allen, getting those bigs involved so they're able to provide the defensive anchor that's required for this team. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a good point that you bring up with Donovan's growth in that playmaking department. I'm actually leaning towards your point.
And you referenced the name Evan Mobley there, and maybe getting him a little bit of help. It does feel like there's quite a common conversation about this these days. I think because people will question. I was listening to the Hoop Genius podcast with Mo Moosey and Coach Brendan Suhr, and Brendan Suhr was saying on that like Wemby's not a traditional five, and I think that's becoming more of a conversation these days. Is what does a traditional five look like, and what's a guy who's kind of like a four that might be playing the five? Like, is Chet Holmgren a traditional five, or does he need Isaiah Hartenstein next to him, for example? And we were very critical of Evan Mobley earlier in the season because he really wasn't getting it done for the Cavs, but in quite a lot of those games he was playing at the five and maybe not making enough of his skills in that scenario, like not making enough of the advantage that you'd have over quite a lot of these traditional fives in terms of speed and ability at the perimeter and things like that. But it feels like since he's moved back to the four, things have just got a lot more comfortable for him. And like Jarrett Allen's numbers don't ever really leap off the box score. I don't think that's his, like, it's not his game for the Cavs is for that to be the case. Even in terms of like blocks and things, there's been a 3-block game against the Thunder, but I'm pretty sure they lost that game. But like all you expect from Jarrett Allen really is for him to be the defensive anchor and for those other guys to go and fill in and get buckets. And on the topic of getting buckets for the Cavs, I want to show some love to Jalen Tyson because he was a player that I didn't sort of keep tabs on too much over his rookie season, but has made that second year leap. And there was one game in particular where he hit 30 points, and like watching the highlights of that game, he just looked like fluid out there on the court. In fact, it was 39 against Philly. In a battering of Philly as well. And it feels like we've gone from the point where Donovan Mitchell was doing it all by himself to other guys finally coming to the party and maybe feeling like they've got their strengths played to a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a couple of folds to it. First of all, you got to give a shout out to the coaching staff because I feel like they're being a lot more creative offensively. There's a lot more inverted ball screens, and what that means is typically, historically, when you run ball screen actions, it's a small guard with the ball in their hands with a bigger guy coming and set a screen. But they've been running it the other way. That's why it's called inverted, specifically with Mobley. Mobley has actually had the ball in his hands, and they've been running pick and roll with Donovan Mitchell setting the screen, which has been helpful for Mobley. And that goes to your point about why Mobley is more comfortable at the four. It is because he does has the skill set to play on the perimeter. He can play inside, but he's not a guy that you're going to throw the ball to and he's going to, blow you away with footwork. He's more so a lob threat, a drop-off guy, but he can put the ball on the floor. And I feel that as though, as of late, he's not hesitant with the ball in his hands. He's not settling for outside shots, and he's just making direct lines to the hoop. He's keeping it very simple, and so he's really thriving in that department. But part of the reason why Cleveland is playing so well, I covered them on Amazon Prime on January 2nd against Denver, and they were on a 3-game winning streak at the time. They squeaked by Denver when Denver had 4 of their 5 starters out, and it was like, okay, this is the time to turn the season around. They had a marquee matchup against Detroit that Sunday. I believe it was Detroit, and they just dropped the ball, and it was like, okay. But, I mean, really since then, they really stepped up because at that time, they were actually were they the 8th seed then when I was covering them? Yeah, they were the 8th seed on January 2nd. And now you look up, and they're a game and a half back behind the 2nd seed. And Tyson has been incredible. I mean, he was just named a rising star this year, and much deservingly so. You mentioned 39 points against Philadelphia on January 16th. But how about this? He scored double figures in 9 consecutive games. He's averaging 17 points a game since January 10th, which is much above his average. I think he's averaging 13 or 14 points. But this is the biggest number that really blows you away. He's second in the league in three-point shooting, 47%. And this is what was part of Cleveland's success last year, why they were the number 1 seed. Why? Is because they took the most threes, but they also made the most threes. This year, still taking the most, they kind of seesawing with Golden State, but they're like, last time I looked, they were like 22nd in makes or field goal 3-point percentage. So they've been really struggling to knock down outside shots. But now that Tyson is getting his 3-ball going, and Sam Merrill, who we know who can shoot, he's been in and out of the lineup, but that just creates so much more space for Donovan, and that's why he's able to thrive. So this is a team we need to keep an eye on because they have everything, right? They have two large guys inside with Mobley and Jared Allen. You have a dynamic guard that can bring home the bacon, that is clutch in the fourth, surrounded by shooters. So, Cleveland has all of a sudden become in the picture and have made themselves major players.
Absolutely, yeah, and we keep referencing how wide open the East is, and you've seen, New York dropping off a little bit in recent weeks. Boston looks like they are, coming to be contenders, but there's still concerns about a couple of those role player guys on their roster. Detroit looks the real deal, but again, young guys, so you have to look at Cleveland as though they are in contention. We did the same with Philly when we looked at them the other week, and the mix of veterans and young guys on both of those rosters, but I guess more so leaning towards veterans and guys that we know we can trust on the Cleveland Cavaliers, and a coach we know we can trust as well in Kenny Atkinson, as you referenced. The credit to the coaching staff before. When Kenny Atkinson was on the Clippers, I sort of got to see up close and personal how good he was on the player development side, because that was his specific role, was player development coach with the Clippers, and the way that he works with guys, the way that he motivates guys night in and night out is second to none, I think, in the league, really. So I think they've always got a chance with him on the bench for them. But we'll flip over, Drew, to my beloved Clippers, because we were rather hard on them at the start of the season for all the right reasons, really. I was giving them a lot. Yeah, I was giving them a lot of tough love at the start. We did a podcast episode where we were sort of speculating back and forth about whether the NBA should reduce their number of games from the 82 game season. I've generally been a fan of that, more so because you hear players coming out and speaking and being fans of that, and I'm generally sort of player first. Like, if what the players' wishes are, I want the best product on the court night after night, so I'll just kind of, almost blindly, I guess, back what the players are saying, and maybe not do enough of the critical thinking on my own. But I really liked the point that you made about how basically the thing that's lacking these days is training camps and the ability for players to take training seriously. And I said at the time in my head, I was doing the Allen Iverson practice speech over and over again for how, like, maybe some of the old guys still didn't take training very seriously, but in a lot of occasions it felt like 5-on-5 in a training camp back in the late 90s, early 2000s was a much more serious endeavor than it is in the NBA now, because guys are just trying not to get hurt and they're going through the motions and they're not taking it seriously. But the really interesting thing with the Clippers has been in a lot of post-game interviews, whether on the court or in press conference rooms and things like that, the players have been coming out and saying that the turning point of this season for the Clippers, who are, the form team in the NBA since December 21st when they beat the Lakers, the turnaround point has been the training camp that they were able to have during NBA Cup week, and they're crediting Jeff Van Gundy with the defensive schemes he was able to, draw up and run them through in that time, and that ability to have a bit of time together to take it seriously has caused this mental buy-in that we're seeing now.
Yeah, shout out to Van Gundy. I saw this back in November when I was able to be there live in Intuit Dome when they were hosting the Atlanta Hawks, and they lost that game. But one thing that really stood out to me was Kawhi Leonard was injured, so he was at the end of the bench. Chris Paul was at the end of the bench as well. The most vocal person on that entire bench was Van Gundy. The amount of times he was out of his seat directing and et cetera, and I was like, that kind of caught my eye. And so it comes to me as no surprise of how he's been name dropped by some of the players and has led and quarterbacked their defense. And again, like, you might be thinking, like, especially with the veteran team, you don't need as much practice. And so you might be saying, like, why has that made the difference of basically them using the NBA Cup schedule as a training camp? Well, nowadays it's all about individual skill work. So a lot of these guys are working with their skills trainers, and, practices are surrounded by that. But at the end of the day, if you're going to be a great team, you have to get on the same page schematically. That is what practice is for. And you don't have to go hard. You don't have to go 2 hours. It doesn't have to be the training camp of the 90s. But you need that touching time. You need time on the court to be able to get on the same page with schemes. And that's basically what they've been able to do defensively. They are much more not only aggressive on that side, but you could just tell that they're all singing from the same tune, and their rotations look better. And that has been the main difference with the Clippers. And then also another point as well is that we talked about Chris Paul in here, and we had an episode where we gave him his flowers. However, um, I always say this because I've been part of many locker rooms, and when you are a superstar player, and a lot of times the superstar guy is usually described as a dick, kind of like the Kobe Bryant mentality, and you could kind of put Kobe Bryant and Chris Paul with the same paintbrush in regards to personality and how they handle their teammates, etc. When your talent doesn't outweigh your personality, guys start to tune you out. And it starts to get annoying, and it starts to rub the guys the wrong way. Now, when you're coming out there and you're scoring 30 and you're giving 10 assists, people just shut up and put up. But when you no longer can perform at that same level, it has a different impact on the locker room. So I am not surprised, and it's quite ironic that since they made that tough decision, because that was a very highly criticized decision in letting go Chris Paul, but their season has turned around, and it didn't happen right away because they still needed time as a team to regroup and to get better on the court. But now there is a clear voice in the locker room. And, it probably was Chris Paul. You can't believe everything you read, but, like, when you have the coaching staff saying one thing and then you got somebody over here whispering to this guy saying, no, do it like this, it causes disruption. It causes fraction in a locker room. So now that there's clear leadership, which we know Kawhi isn't the vocal leader, Harden isn't the vocal leader. It's Van Gundy, it's the coach. Even Lou is not really a vocal guy. And so everyone has one chief. You know what I mean? And so it's not a bunch of chiefs, so the Clippers are playing very well, and a lot of that finally is Kawhi. I mean, Kawhi has been balling. 24 games with 20 points or more. A career year shooting the ball, 2.2 steals, which leads the league. A career year in scoring the ball. I was actually surprised that 28 points is his most ever. And then free throw line, he's automatic. 92% on the season. He missed one last night or the other night, which dropped him from 94%, which would have been top 10 all time had the season ended at that moment. And shout out to your Clippers, man. I bet it seems like you're sleeping much easier these days, and you're smiling more now, John.
Yeah, finally I'm not suffering through watching at least my basketball team. I was always enjoying following the NBA season, but it's tough, isn't it, when you're following something that you think is like a great product and a great time to be a part of something, and yet the worst thing about that product or about that time is your team. Like every podcast I listened to, which I was having a joy listening to, consuming all the NBA content. It's why I reference so many of the podcasts on our podcast here on these episodes, is because I'm enjoying consuming the content around the NBA so much this season, because I think it's been a brilliant regular season. But the one sort of scourge on it from even before the season started, because of the aspiration stuff, has been the Clippers, and then the way the Clippers season has unfolded from there has basically meant that every time the Clippers part comes on, I'm almost just tempted to skip through it and be I don't want to hear this, because I know how bad my team are, I know how bad the mentality is in the locker room and all these things. And you referenced the Chris Paul stuff, and I think Kendrick Perkins has come out in the way that Perk is always want to do, and basically thrown all the blame and all the shade towards Chris Paul's direction, and I'm not having that. The Clippers still dealt with that Chris Paul situation in a way that I don't think was fitting of a guy who should have had his jersey hung in the rafters. I'd be very surprised if he accepts that now, if the Clippers were still to offer it to him, because I think this has all just ended in a really sour way, and I don't like that at all. But you're right to say that the most vocal leader in the locker room is Jeff Van Gundy. Him and Chris Paul are clearly butted heads. When you read the Ramona Shelburne piece of ESPN, where she sort of went behind the scenes on everything that had happened, it was clear that the biggest fallout and really the straw that broke the camel's back was Jeff Van Gundy and Chris Paul getting into it over Chris Paul switching a defensive scheme with Kawhi in game, and Jeff Van Gundy sort of asking him what empowers him to do that, and trying to tell him to know his role, because he is just a role player on the Clippers now. He's not that guy. The Clippers have two of those guys, and as you say, those two guys are more so Kawhi really, but those two guys have definitely come to the party in the last few weeks, and I think you've seen that. I think you've seen that mental buy-in now, and sometimes it does, and you'll know this, Drew, because you've been in locker rooms and been on teams. Sometimes it takes a little bit of adversity and for people to start counting you out, for you all to get a sort of siege mentality together to go, it's us against the world here. Ty Lue is even doing stuff I'm not generally seen him do. Like, he's changed tact a little bit, I think, where you're seeing guys like Kobe Sanders and Jordan Miller really develop in recent weeks and really feel empowered to develop. And generally, Ty Lue has been like frustrating almost in the way that like he won't lean on young guys and he won't put the emphasis on developing young guys. And obviously Ty Lue's sort of modus operandi is always to just make winning basketball. So play the veterans, play your best players, and make it into a winning basketball team, because Steve Ballmer almost just wants to win. But we're actually seeing now that guys like Kobe Sanders and Jordan Miller can be very good NBA role players, can really fill their role for a team, can actually pour in buckets on a night-to-night basis as well if one of the sort of main guys is not having his night. So shout out to Kobe Sanders, shout out to Jordan Miller, and shout out to the Clippers for what they're doing the past few weeks.
Yeah, and it goes back to my saying. I keep telling you guys what you need in today's NBA. You need depth, you need youth, and you need length. And the Clippers are the oldest team in the league, the second slowest in pace in the NBA. And so, with their style of play, they're a more half-court, grinded-out team, and they play more of playoff-style basketball, which their style will be suitable in the playoffs, but it's 82 games. You got to get yourself easy buckets. And right now, those two guys that you just referenced, Jordan Miller and Kobe Sanders, who's, a two-way guy, they have brought this team youth and just the ability to just throw the ball ahead to your thoroughbreds and allow them to just get an easy layup. And then those veterans don't even have to cross half court. It reserves energy, and you have more energy to play defense when you're able to get easy baskets. When you got to grind out every single offensive possession and then come back down and play grind out defense, it takes a toll on you. And when you have an average age of 28, whatever the Clippers is, it is tough to win in today's NBA. So those guys have really rejuvenated this team and brought some juice and young legs, which this team desperately needs. Shout out to the Clippers.
Absolutely, yeah. Both two-way guys, Kobe Sanders and Jordan Miller, so it'll be interesting to see what the Clippers do in terms of getting those guys onto the main roster, because I think they've at least earned a playoff berth at this stage. Maybe it's that they end up trading Chris Paul for next to nothing just to free up that roster spot. The Clippers are only on sort of 14 main place at the moment. They've recently picked up Patrick Baldwin Jr. I think he's on his second 10-day now, but that's just so that they can keep the two-way guys ticking and keep them getting to their maximum amount of games, because they've been genuinely important to the roster this season. But speaking of roster makeups and all those kind of things, Drew, I want to flip over to the ATL, because this is really looking like Jalen Johnson's team now with the Hawks. He is absolutely stuffing the stat sheet in recent games. But I want to give a shout out to one of the guys who came in, who may have been a sneaky pickup for the Hawks, and CJ McCollum. I was on the podcast early in the season saying, free CJ McCollum, get CJ McCollum on a winning team. And while the Hawks are not necessarily, you're not expecting to finish as a winning team this season. Maybe they will. Who knows? It could still be a way to go from here. They're 23 and 25 at the moment, but I want to shout out to CJ McCollum, because he has come in as the sixth man off the bench and played his role to absolute perfection, and doesn't get in the way of a star player like Jalen Johnson. Of course, that goes without saying. He's a vet who will empower his young guys. If you look at Jalen Johnson's stat sheets in the past few weeks, as I say, absolutely incredible, so stand out. Shout out to the Hawks. It feels like the vibes are good there off the back of this Trae Young trade.
Yeah, and Jalen Johnson probably will earn himself his first All-Star bid. It depends. If he doesn't, it just means that team performance wasn't quite up to par, but individually he definitely deserves it. He's flirting with a triple-double every game pretty much, and he's the reason why, Trae Young was traded. You didn't require his services anymore when you have a guy that's, basically 10 inches taller. Jalen Johnson's legit 6'9". He can feed this. It's not the way that Trae Young does it, because Trae Young was the NBA leader, but he can create, he can score, he can defend, and again, he brings that team length defensively, although Atlanta's defense hasn't been that great since the trade. But, I think they're thinking more long-term, and you could slowly see this NBA transitioning into multiple great guys with length, not just a one guy ball-dominant guy who's very small like a Trae Young. So you're slowly starting to see those positions become extinct. But, it wasn't all roses at first with CJ. Atlanta struggled out the gate. Fans were calling that he was actually hindering Jalen Johnson, because Jalen Johnson went through a little rut there, and Atlanta lost 4 in a row, but since then they won 3 in a row. And although I take it with a grain of salt because it was Memphis, Phoenix, and the Pacers, they are turning things around. And like I keep saying, like this team is very, very long, and they got a guy who can create his own shot. Dyson Daniels got to improve his 3-point shot for this team to really go anywhere.
Very much so, by the way.
13% or something crazy. Like, he has to get better in that department. But, CJ has calmed the critics because he tweeted in their last win when he scored 23 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists, and I quote, "Don't fret. I really do this." So he heard the noise.
Absolutely, yeah. And you've referenced a couple of the guys on the team, and I really like the makeup of this team, to be honest, because even with Dyson Daniels having a little bit of a down year shooting-wise after an MIP season last season, that backcourt is still not a backcourt I would want to come up against in the playoffs. Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Dyson Daniels, they are two defensive specialists, two guys who are happy to defend the head of the snake for the other team. Alexander Walker has taken a massive leap in terms of scoring this season. I've not actually seen MIP odds, but I wouldn't be surprised if Alexander Walker was in those conversations for MIP, really. A formidable front court. We've already referenced Jalen Johnson, and we've given him his flowers a lot over the course of this season for the leap that he's taken. But Onyeka Okongwu as well, it was a guy who I was, really had a close eye on coming out of the draft, and he had a couple of down years with just health and a couple of other things like that along the way. But he's really coming into his own this season. And another guy who, I wouldn't have expected necessarily to be an out-and-out 5, and yet he's coming to the party as an out-and-out 5. It might have just been because, Atlanta was trying to do a double bigs thing with guys that weren't really suited to that position in the past. But now with a legit 4 in Jalen Johnson and a legit 5 in Okongwu, it looks like it's really working. And then they've got all the sharpshooting wings. I've just realised that it's Kispert, Kennard and Krejci and McCollum who are all the sort of sharpshooting wings that Atlanta can boast at the moment. Kispert still, a little bit waiting to arrive at the party, but he's been starting for the Hawks, so that's an interesting little thing from Quinn Snyder there in terms of what he sees as the fit. Kennard coming off the bench. I've always said that Kennard again leading the NBA this season in terms of 3-point percentage, but a guy who can be a little bit shot shy, but can still give you the buckets he needs to give you on any given night. You were in Intuit Dome, Drew, for a Vic Krejci masterclass. I've seen a couple of those against the Clippers in recent times, because he's one of those guys that lazier teams or older teams may not necessarily guard like he's meant to be guarded, and then he will just torch at any given moment. And then CJ McCollum, we've referenced to, has just been a virtuoso. So as you said, it's so tricky, isn't it? Because these things always get judged so quick. The minute a big trade is pulled, everyone has eyes right on that first game after the trade, being right, okay, well let's see if the proof's in the pudding then. But these things always take a little bit of time to shake out. The fact that anybody was ever questioning whether CJ McCollum was going to get in Jalen Johnson's way is almost laughable to me. And if you were doing it off the back of the first 3 games, then slow your roll. Let these things play out as they should over time.
And they have fantastic coaching. Quinn Snyder is a fantastic coach. They got our boy Ryan Schmidt, who coached over here the London Lions, so shout out to him. But this is a team that, maybe this year might be a little bit too early, but next year you got to look out for. I mean, they're 10th right now in the standings, and if I look at all the teams above them, I think they're better than Chicago, better than Orlando, because Orlando is just a mess right now. And I think they're better than Miami. I obviously don't think they're better than Philly or Cleveland, New York, Toronto. But those other teams that's right there in the grabs, they're 4 games out of securing the 6th spot. I think they're better than those teams. So I really look for Atlanta to have a great second half. That's a great shout.
Absolutely, yeah, and interesting to see what they do in the off-season really as well. CJ's on expiring and big money. If they could get him back on something closer to a vet minimum or a mid-level exception, then potentially lots of flexibility in the cap space there to go and continue to improve and continue to sort of build this roster around younger guys. But shout out to Jalen Johnson's Atlanta Hawks, because they are absolutely coming to the party. And as you say, who knows? That Eastern Conference is wide open. Second half of the season, we'll keep saying it. We'll keep lobbying for the teams who are lower down in that play-in, who may just have something to say when it's all said and done. But I want to shout out, Drew, I want to sort of use this last part of the main part of the show. We'll still do our understated story and bold predictions for the week ahead. But I want to use this to talk about Derrick Rose, and his jersey retirement, because this was something that meant a lot to me. I didn't actually get to watch the ceremony live, but I've watched the sort of highlights of it since back, and it got me going down like a bit of a memory lane trip, to be honest, because I started supporting the Clippers and getting back into the NBA in 2013 after, just not really knowing how to access it for many years. I watched it a lot in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s when I was a really young kid, and it was on free-to-air television over here, and there was the days of like Allen Iverson, who was a player that I fell in love with because he was this smaller guard who would, at least in the games that I saw in the NBA Finals when they played against the Lakers, had no issue going inside and trying to get his own against players like Shaquille O'Neal and people like that. And that was the kind of player that I loved, was that smaller guard who played with absolutely no fear, played with pace, ability to get to the basket, handles, all those different kinds of things. And like it made me go back and watch that Derrick Rose mixtape, I should say. I keep saying Derrick Jones because he's the Clippers player. The Derrick Rose mixtape from his MVP season, and they were just key in getting me back into basketball. But sort of enough about me in this story, because this is genuinely a love story between a kid from Chicago and his hometown team. And for me, Drew, it's a lesson to any young hooper that, things may not always go to plan. We all know the injuries that Derrick Rose had throughout his career and how much of a hard luck story it became. But what this jersey retirement to me shows, and shows to young hoopers especially, is that hard work and dedication will always be the greatest legacy that you can leave behind.
Yeah, it was only fitting that Derrick got his rose, and much deserved. Although a lot of his success was very front-loaded, kind of reminds me of Grant Hill's career, where a lot of promise, was able to get a lot of work done early, but then late dealt with injuries, but had enough body of work where you deserve a Hall of Fame shout. So I really gravitated to him. I first heard of Derrick Rose, when he was at Memphis. I remember watching him in the NCAA finals against Kansas Jayhawks, and Mario Chalmers obviously kind of shot Memphis down. My teammate at the time was from Tennessee, so he was a Memphis fan, and that kind of put Calipari, that kind of put Derrick Rose on my radar. And then I obviously followed him to Chicago, and I kind of gravitated to his game because I saw some similarities to mine, where he attacked the rim violently, fearless, and that's kind of how I played my game. I obviously wasn't as athletic as Derrick, but I saw some similarities, and so I really followed him. And for him to basically single-handedly put on a cape during that time where LeBron James was just running the East, and keep Chicago in the conversation, and to keep them right there at the finish line where you think they could get it done. I mean, they had a great team that was built around some great role players. I watched a couple of those clips as well. Luol Deng, Joakim Noah, the list just goes on and on. Taj Gibson. They just had a team that was perfectly built for Derrick Rose, and just to hear those guys' speeches talk about him, it just coincided with how we always felt about him. He was a guy of very little words. A memory that kind of pops in my head is that kind of all-star game that we seen floating around with Dwight Howard and LeBron and them all dancing, and Derrick Rose just standing there just kind of looking. That was Derrick Rose. Like, he wasn't into all of that.
Yeah.
Like, he was just a hooper. He wasn't a showman. And I also heard the podcast, the 502 podcast, where Teague talked about, he had 44, and he told Coach to take him out. He was like, "You're not gonna get 50," and he just wasn't into that. Like, he's just a very humble young man who cared about winning, and so it was great to see him get his rose. And that ceremony was just the production of it was just immaculate. I mean, the court, everything, and then his wife with that red, that jacket she had on. Goodness gracious, it was clean. So. It was a beautiful moment. Much deserved for Derrick.
Absolutely, yeah. Shout out to Derrick Rose, one of my favourites of all time, and glad that he's going to go down in Chicago history now with guys who are part of dynasties and things like that. I think it's without the chips and without all those things, it's absolutely where he deserves to be. As I say, for that same hard work and dedication that created champions in Chicago. So we'll finish off, Drew, with our understated story of the week, and then flip over to our bold predictions for the second part of this. Do you want to take the rock first for understated story, or do you want me to go?
Yeah, I'll take the rock and run the point. Underrated story of the week. I'm going to surprise a lot of you out there because usually I always focus on the positive, but I'm going to focus on the negative, which is ultimately going to turn into a positive. And that's the Washington Wizards because December, they were scaring me a little bit because they were actually winning. They went on a little mini streak there. But now the Washington Wizards are doing what they need to be doing, and that is losing. They have lost 9 in a row. They're 10-34, which is worse in the NBA right now. And they just set a record a couple of games ago against Charlotte, I believe, against OKC with the youngest starting lineup ever at age 20 years old and 6 months with Johnson, Sarr, Keyshawn George, Bub Carrington, and Will Riley. And this is exactly what this team needs because they have some very great young talent, and they're one superstar away. So they need to be in this lottery. They need to be to put themselves in a position to be able to grab A.J. DeBansta or Darren Peterson. And if they get one of those, they are ready to rock and roll. And I love the message that we've seen from the president there. Let me just see if I could pull up my notes. I just had the website up here, but I can't find it. But anyways, he just mentioned that he expects the Washington Wizards to be competitive in the next 16 months. And so he is not in the business of tanking. This is Michael Winger. So he expects them to be much more competitive next season. And he's committed to developing, the players that's inside the building. And that's kind of what the NBA is reverting back to now. Free agency is getting really difficult with the second apron, and you have to be able to develop your own players. So they have a lot of young talent there. They get one more in this draft, which they will. Fingers crossed. Washington Wizards are in a great shape for the future.
Absolutely, yeah, and you can see how a Darren Peterson or AJ DeBonsa would slot right into that lineup as well. It'd be very interesting to see. Let's just say that it's a team that I started the season quite low on because I wasn't sort of clued up particularly on a lot of the young talent they've got there, and then when I've watched Trey Johnson play basketball this season, it's hard not to get excited by a play like that. Like the way that guy shoots the ball is unbelievable. And Keyshawn George, Alex Sarr, Alex Sarr, I think I probably judged wrong at first because like when a rookie comes out of the draft and especially comes as high up as Alex Sarr was, like he would have been the first overall pick if he didn't basically snub Atlanta for Washington. You kind of expect them to be like high scoring guys, but it feels like Alex Sarr has actually all the ingredients to be like a real defensive specialist who may not put up, numbers in terms of buckets night after night. I'm sure that will come as part of his game because I do think he can still get to that elite level, but the defensive side of the ball for him.
Yeah, leading the lead in blocks, and I just want to say that I'm with you, Josh, as I was a victim of judging him by that first summer league game because he went scoreless, and I never really paid attention to him anymore. But like he is having a fantastic year.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, shout out to Alex Sarr and the Washington Wizards. For my understated story of the week, kind of sticking on a similar theme, maybe not quite as sort of negative leaning as yours was, albeit I like that you flipped it into a positive. My understated story is Keontae George, so flipping from Keyshawn George and his team to Keontae George and the Utah Jazz, because the Jazz are such an interesting team for me. I think they were always going to, tank this season, and particularly when Walker Kessler went down with that injury, I think it was only ever in one way, really. I feel sorry for Will Hardy. I'm glad that he is, one of the youngest coaches, if not the youngest coach in the NBA, because it means that he's got staying power to stay resolute through this rebuild for the Utah Jazz. But you look at the guys they've got on that roster there, and there is so much to be excited about. And I want to give a particular shout out to Keontae George because I was looking this stat up earlier. and over, I believe it's since the Trae Young trade, because I sort of use that as a bit of like a line in the sand for a lot of teams. He is right up there with the guys who scored, the most in the NBA. I'll be able to find exactly where this lands. But like you look at his recent games in particular, and some of the numbers he's putting up night after night are incredible. And I heard him on the Zach Lowe podcast recently, and I was like, there's a little anecdote from that I was so pleased with, where basically Will Hardy had him running suicides when they were doing like their fitness tests and trying to go up to speed at the start of the season. And Will Hardy, or one of the coaching staff, said to Keontae George, "You can pick the music for your suicides that you're going to run. What would you like to pick?" And he said, "I'll have some gospel music because I'm going to need Jesus." and I just really like that. I really like the personality that came across. Yeah, the personality that came across on the Zach Lowe show was brilliant. He just seems like such a level-headed guy, someone who's like an old head on young shoulders, and has been absolutely hooping for the Utah Jazz this season, and has probably surprised me a little in terms of like maybe another name that I didn't necessarily know coming out of college or from last season. And has like really surprised. And so I was just getting the stat then, but so from last Monday, so technically in the week that we would call like a podcast week for us, he's averaging 28.8 points. So really able to put up numbers for this Utah Jazz team. More than happy to take the keys. Has got a really good relationship with Lauri Markkanen on the court and off the court, by the sounds of it, from that interview as well, sort of taking the little nuggets from that. So yeah, absolutely shout out to Keontae George and the Utah Jazz, because the future is so bright for those guys. It doesn't feel like they actually need all that much really to become a winning basketball team, besides a little bit of better luck with health, a few things around the fringes, but I'm sure they're going to get another good pick this season, and I'm sure they're going to make the absolute best of that. So, yeah, shout out to them. They're my understated story, or Keontae George in particular is my understated story of the week. Shall I take the lead for ball predictions then, Drew?
Yeah, go ahead. Take it away.
Drew's swung the ball around from the point guard position. I've found myself in the corner. I've hesitated a little because I've remembered early in the season I put my Clippers in a lot of bold predictions, especially for weeks ahead, for things that were to come, and that little bit of hesitation has caused me to stop. And sometimes hesitation is the best defender in basketball, but still I've risen up and I've shot my shot, and we'll see if it goes in on next week's episode, because the All-Star reserves are going to be picked on Sunday, February 1st, 6 p.m. Eastern time, meaning that if me and Drew record on Monday morning, not to be fair, whenever me and Drew record next week, we'll have our All-Star reserves. And my bold prediction, Drew, is that LeBron James will not be in that list of All-Star reserves, but James Harden and Kawhi Leonard both will be. Let's see. I've turned away like Steph. Turned away from my own shot.
and you know who you look like? You look like Nick Young. Remember when he turned away and rimmed out? What do they say about people who hesitate? Normally, you don't make it. I mean, I don't. I could argue for Kawhi because the way he's been playing, and I could see them leaning into needing a Clipper because it's at Intuit Dome, and it would seem weird to not have a Clipper. But has he played enough games? That's the question. I don't see two of them for sure. I don't see two. I see Kawhi. I don't see James Harden, even though he's having a great year. But it wouldn't shock me. But man, yeah, next time just shoot the ball. Don't hesitate.
It's like it's the Clippers PTSD, Drew. It just runs through my brain all the times. Like, when I make this bold prediction for the Clippers, am I going to look silly again? And maybe I will, but that's the whole point of it.
Yeah, well, you talk about All-Star. We got the trade deadline coming up February 8th, so 2 weeks away. And so I'm going to fit my story around that narrative. And by the time we hook up, which is sometime next week, I'm actually in Birmingham this weekend for the SLB Finals, so I'm not back until Monday evening. So it'll probably be Tuesday on, which is perfect because it gives me one extra day. And I'm going to say that by the time we come back, that Giannis Antetokounmpo will be traded, and he will be in a new uniform. He won't be playing because he's just diagnosed himself out 4 to 6 weeks with a calf injury. Yeah, didn't even need the team to declare that or an MRI, but he said he's out 4 to 6 weeks, and I think this is the end of a great story of where he brought a franchise, his first championship since '79 or whenever that was. But this marriage has run its course. You just see the quotes in the media. You see where this team is not even in the play-in at the moment. They're 3 and something without him. So if they're not going to have him for the foreseeable future, you can't assume they're going to win. So I think they just go and blow it up, get some assets, move on from Giannis, and they won't wait to the very end because I believe Giannis is the reason why the trades have been held up. They're waiting on the first domino to fall, which is him. And the next time we'll be here, Giannis will be remains to be seen.
I was tempted to ask you. I was like, I wonder if you got a team in mind here, because that's the only thing that's been, it's the only thing that's been stopping me whenever I think about like any of these big trades. Really, like I had Ja Morant as a potential Milwaukee Buck, just in terms of how the money stacked up. Like he can go straight up for Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis in terms of the money. It might help Giannis in terms of pick and roll actions. You can have Miles Turner spacing the floor. I could see how those kind of things could work if you had Giannis as more of a sort of, a bit of a mix between pick and pop and pick and roll, and Ja is able to get to the rim sometimes off that as well. But I just don't know where he ends up, and that's the only thing that's like holding me back, because I'd love to see it. Like I'd love for the big trade to come before the trade deadline now, because I'm slightly concerned myself that it's just gonna flame out, and there's gonna have been, I know obviously the Trae Young trade happened, but it didn't feel particularly Hollywood in the end, did it? So I'm kind of concerned that maybe the big trade doesn't come, but I'm rooting for your prediction, because I'd love to see things get shaken up all over again. I think Giannis deserves better than what Milwaukee has been able to give him in recent times, but the legacy of that story in terms of him winning the championship in that small market and things should never be forgotten either. And that was probably one of my favourite championship seasons of recent times, even though it was a year where it felt like the Clippers maybe could have gone a little bit further and injuries got in the way again. But yeah, shout out to Giannis and Milwaukee. That was a love story once upon a time. Hopefully it's going to come to an end that satisfies both of them. But that does it for me for this week. So the only thing left for me to say is for Drew to lead us out.
Yeah, and I'll finish by saying I won't be surprised if we get nothing for the trade deadline, because the 3 blockbuster names that's been discussed, which is Giannis, Morant, and Anthony Davis, are all injured. So it could flame out, like you said, my man. But thank you, as always, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in every single week. Like I always say, go drop a comment. Please subscribe. That really helps us out a lot. But until next time, we will catch you guys next week. And I cannot wait to discuss Giannis's new uniform. Peace out, ladies and gentlemen.